Hello, Matthew Bell with ALZHEIMER'S Today I want to continue the discussion that I've been having about family councils, and in particular I want to talk through 10 possible objections that a facility might have or that an administrator of a facility might have to the creation of a family council. So in a previous video I sketched what the family council is, and in another video I already talked about some of the federal regulations that underlie the Family Council. In particular, it's Title 42 of the Code of Federal Regulations. But in this video, I want to talk through some of the things you might hear from an administrator or from some of the staff members if they have some resistance to the creation of a family council. So I'm going to assume that you understand that the basic idea of the family council is that it's a group of family members getting together to support their relatives who are in the nursing home, not just in terms of supporting them from the standpoint of moral support, but actually trying to help them talk through issues or talk through issues on their behalf that is going to enable them to have a voice in the way that the nursing home is run. So it's a policy-making body. Essentially, it's a body that's going to recommend changes to the home in order to address certain problems potentially, or to try and make improvements in the quality of life for the resident. One objection you might hear from the administration or from the facility is that we already have an open door policy. People are able to come to us directly. You don't need the family council. One thing I want to get out of the way right away is that one of the responses to almost every single one of the objections is going to be, look, we are allowed and permitted to have a family council, and if we have a family council, Code of Federal Regulations, U.S. law, essentially requires that the nursing home recognize the family council. Now, obviously, you're not going to make a lot of friends if you immediately go to and play the lawyer card, but the fact of the matter is that the Code of Federal Regulations requires at least those nursing homes that participate in the Medicare and Medicaid programs to recognize a family council. And you want to bear that in mind, because for almost every one of these objections, fundamentally, it's just going to be, look, you don't have the ability. You as an administrator, you as a staff member of this nursing home, do not have the ability to block the families from forming a family council. But other responses might be advised just because they kind of soften or they enable you to hopefully address some of these concerns without having to just play the we can do what we want card. And one of the responses to the idea that the facility has an open door policy would be, that's great. I'm glad the facility has that open door policy, but when a group is family-led, certain people are going to participate in that, and certain people are going to feel more comfortable sharing concerns with families than they would have been with the staff or the administration. And so it's likely that our family council is going to complement what you guys are already doing with your open door policy, and it's going to enable us to field and hear more complaints and concerns than we would have heard otherwise. So in other words, we're going to be helping you rather than competing against you. But once again, the open door policy is irrelevant. Title 42 of the Code of Federal Regulations allows us to have a family council and requires that you recognize it. Second objection might be this: not every resident has a family member who could participate, and so in that way the facility might allege that there's something discriminatory about a family council. And the first response is that the family council can work to improve the quality of life for every resident and not just for those who do have family members. The second is that the family council can be composed of friends and other representatives, even for those residents who don't have family members. And the third response is that family members are not the only people who can be in the family council. Residents can attend meetings as well. So there's no reason why not having a family member or somebody to represent you on the family council means that the facility should not have a family council. Number three, it's kind of related to number one, but somebody might say, well, we already have a staff-led group. There's already a group, so you don't need the family council. First thing is, staff-led is different than family-led. There's going to be different focuses, number one. So a staff-led group might be focused on a person's feelings about certain problems, whereas the family council is maybe focused on trying to suggest solutions to practical problems. But the other thing is that obviously the staff is working for the corporation, it's working for the nursing home, versus the families are simply working for themselves. So they're coming from different places. This doesn't mean there has to be a competition, but it does mean that there is a need to have those separate groups in force at the same time, or at least it means that there's no in principle reason why the existence of a staff-led group should automatically say, oh yeah, that staff-led group is doing exactly what the family council would do, because that's not the case. And the way perhaps you can get an administrator or a staff member to see that is if you said to them, well look, if the family council had already existed, would you guys think that a staff-led group wasn't necessary because the family council already exists? And probably they wouldn't think that. Probably they would think, well, families are doing their own thing, we want to do ours as well. And so that same reasoning applies to why a family council should have the ability to form, even if a staff-led group forms. And once again, go back to Title 42. You are allowed to have one, and the facility is required to acknowledge it, if you do have one. A fourth objection, kind of related, would be that the facility objects to having no staff member present, or they insist on a staff member being present. So in other words, they might say, well, we can't condone this or allow it unless you allow some oversight. Now, the first softest response would just be families need time to themselves. It's going to be a kind of a freeing, a safer environment in which they can speak more freely. But the other facet of it really does have to go back to Title 42, and that is in the Code of Federal Regulations, U.S. law, federal law, requires that the families be given a private space to meet, and it indicates that staff members can only join the group or only attend a meeting at the family member's invitation. So the families are autonomous and independent, and the facility is required to respect that. Now, a related concern might be 5, that the facility alleges that the staff members are the only ones who are trained to facilitate the kind of interaction that would likely be going on during a family council meeting. And the first response is that's somewhat presumptuous. Many family members have business backgrounds or other backgrounds, teachers, that would enable them to be equally good, if not better, facilitators. The second point is that the need to facilitate in a staff-directed or staff-implicated discussion is probably different from the need to facilitate in a family-led discussion. This isn't to say that family members are all going to get along, but it is to say that there's going to be a different atmosphere, and so the facilitation that might be required in a staff-led meeting is probably not going to be the same as the facilitation that would be required in a family-led meeting. Another point is that people can be trained or they can grow into the role of facilitator, so I'm not so sure that not having a person who's a professional facilitator is a reason to not have a family council. It's just a reason to understand that the family council may have to grow into its role, and that's okay. And finally, federal regulations do not talk about a family council can form if there's a professional facilitator. That's not part of it. There's no requirement, and so it's simply an irrelevance. Now, a seventh concern is somewhat related, but it's a little bit different, and that would be maybe an administrator might say, well, our staff are too busy to run a family council or to hear concerns, and so we have to postpone this or not have it form. And here, there could be a subtle confusion, obviously, if the facility is under the impression that you as a family member are saying that they have something additional that they have to do. You might just be able to say, oh, hey, I think there just might be a misunderstanding. No, family council is completely self-directed, self-led, we're independent. You don't have to worry about having a staff member run it because they're actually not allowed to. And then you can point them to federal regulation. But in addition, so it's just not the staff's role to lead it, and so they don't have to worry about that. But in addition, the families who are leading it can also avail themselves of the help of the state ombudsman. There's generally a state ombudsman program, and the ombudsman program people are generally skilled and knowledgeable about family councils, and so you can appeal to them for assistance. And once again, federal regulation talks about the distance that should be in place between the facility and the family council, meaning not only is the staff only allowed to be there by invitation, but certainly they're not leading meetings. The only thing that is required is that the facility has to appoint somebody to receive the complaints, receive the statements that the family council makes. So they have to have some kind of a liaison in place. But really that's to the benefit of the facility because they're going to get more feedback from the family council than they would have gotten from other places, and that can be very helpful for them. Now, further concern, number 7, that was actually number 6, is that the resident council, which may be in place, might be undercut or somehow in competition with the family council. And so the complaint or the concern might be, well, we can't let you have a family council because there's already a resident council. The first thing here is that the resident and the family councils are able to work in tandem. Again, a resident can join and be a member and attend meetings from the family council. Certainly that's not forbidden in any way. They have a direct interest in the facility, and the whole point of the family council is to assist the residents. So in the case of a resident with an impairment like Alzheimer's disease, that becomes much more important because the resident cannot speak for him or herself. But in the cases of residents who can speak for themselves, certainly they should be members of their resident council, and they can also give input to the family council. And once again, the Code of Federal Regulations does not say the facility must recognize a family council if a resident council does not exist. There's no link in the regulation between a resident and a family council to the degree that this question would imply. In other words, the fact that there's a resident council does not undercut, for all intents and purposes, the formation of or the ability of a family council to form. Now, having said this, I am not a lawyer. I'm not an expert in interpreting Title 42. I can't give you legal advice. I can't actually advise you. The only thing I can say is that these things that I'm suggesting to you here are the products of my own research, and I just present them for your information. I'm presenting them as is. Do what you will with them. The eighth objection is going to be maybe the facility says, well, we had a family council in the past, we had bad experiences with them, and so we are a little bit gun-shy about starting a new one. Here, I would simply say, if there had been bad administrators in the past, that's not a reason to not have an administrator now. Bad experiences in the past are regrettable, for sure, but the new family council is going to be made up of new people, and the bad experiences in the past can't be used to judge the new council, number one. And number two, once again, Code of Federal Regulations does not say a family council can form so long as there wasn't a bad one in the past. It's irrelevant. It's regrettable, but it's irrelevant. A related concern might be that the facility had some experience where a person went to the media and there may have been embarrassment that was generated. And what you should probably get the facility to understand here is that the family council's role and function is not to go to the media. The role of the family council is to try to help the facility to settle the problems in-house. Now, it's certainly open to people to pursue whatever trajectory they feel is necessary to get the results that are required. So if the facility is not cooperative, at some point a person might say maybe implicating or involving the media is a justifiable thing, but this is down the road. Hopefully, the family council is able to bring concerns, complaints to the facility that the facility then genuinely listens to, takes on board, and then the facility and the council together walk through solutions that might be practical and implementable so that those concerns can be resolved. So once again, the family council can be a credit to the facility because it can help to avoid embarrassing situations from occurring. And finally, objection number 10 is that the family council is somehow a violation of HIPAA. So HIPAA has to do with patient privacy, and the concern might be that, well, if you guys are talking all together, the individual patient or individual resident's medical histories are going to be improperly and publicly aired. The response here is probably twofold. First of all, there's no reason why personal medical histories have to be a part of the discussions the family council makes. So for instance, the family council is often going to be talking about things like the availability of food, staffing problems, lighting problems, safety issues, and things that affect everybody facility-wide. So there's not necessarily any reason why individual medical concerns have to be a part of that. But the second thing is that if a person in a public space decides to divulge personal medical, they're free to do that. HIPAA does not prevent me from telling you about my medical history. It prevents a person who is knowledgeable about my medical history, a third party like my doctor. It prevents my doctor from sharing that information with just whomever he pleases. But it doesn't prevent me from talking about it. It doesn't prevent my family from divulging things in the context where they think that that might be useful. They can certainly, if you want to think of it as a waiver of their rights to privacy, they can do that. If I decide to tell you something about my medical history, that's not a violation of HIPAA. So family councils can operate with that same mentality. And the final point that I would make, just to bring it back to Title 42, is presumably the legislators who crafted and drafted Title 42 did not think that the formation of a family council was going to somehow undercut HIPAA. And with that in mind, they either think it's an irrelevance or that they think it's certainly not a concern that should prevent or weigh heavily on the mind of a person who's thinking about a family council. So once again, Title 42 is going to be the go-to, ultimately the trump card, because if a family group exists, according to Title 42 of the Code of Federal Regulations, the facility must acknowledge it, must have a staff member receive complaints from it, and the whole thing. I invite you to check out my video, which I'll put a link in the description, where I deal with Title 42 at greater length. But if something I said in this video was of help to you, I invite you to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be alerted to new content as it becomes available. I thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again in another video. Thank you.